Polly told me that a couple of the girls were coming over. They were going to have a slumber party.
There you go.
It was going to be a rockin' good time for 3 little 12-year-old girls.
Please try and keep the noise down tonight, okay? Polly, I have a headache again, okay? Okay, Mom. Night, girls. Night.
Polly had said everyone should come over, and my mom said I couldn't go. At that age, your friends are like rock solid friendships. Like, we're gonna be friends forever.
I'll go get the sleeping bag.
I want you girls to count to 1,000. When you're done, Polly will be back.
The thought of somebody coming into a house and taking a child was just unthinkable. How could this have happened? Did this really happen?
She was the love of my life.
I can't. Okay. Come on. Okay, get up. Down. Let's go. This is Nicole. Polly's gone. We need to come.
When Eve Nickel is wrestled awake by 2 scared 12-year-olds, it takes time to understand the severity of the situation. That is, until she realizes one girl is missing. Her daughter, Polly Claass. After a frantic search of the house, Eve makes the most terrible call of her life.
Apparently, a woman broke into our house and took my daughter.
When the report of a kidnapping is relayed to Petaluma Police Sergeant Vale Bello, he's stunned.
I was born and raised in Petaluma. The house I was born in was a block away.
This is a call Bello never expected. As soon as he gets to the house, the reality of the situation hits him hard.
We met the girls. Eve was in a state of shock. We asked her what had happened. And the girls went into a very in-depth story of how the stranger had come in through the door.
She's going to go grab supplies. The next, there's this guy in her room.
Now, the first time any of you saw him was when Polly opened the door.
Yes.
Polly's friends, Kate and Jillian, recount a scene right out of a horror movie.
That's all like it. Wow. Oh, thank you. You're so generous.
The instant Polly opens the door, a menacing figure fills the doorway and steps into the room.
There's this guy in her room with a knife.
Kate and Jillian described the suspect at the time as a man in his 30s or so, white male.
He had a beard.
And they were very specific about this. They said he was carrying a knife with a wooden handle and a long blade. They said his demeanor was almost apologetic and polite, but firm in the situation. And he wanted to know who lived there and where the valuables were. You know, at the time, their initial reaction, I think all of them, they couldn't speak for Polly, but I think they were speaking for her when they thought it was a joke initially. And it rapidly became apparent that it wasn't a joke at all. I think when he asked where the valuables were, I think, I can't get into his head and I can't speak to his mindset, but, you know, my thoughts are that he probably was using it to mask in the girls' minds what he was really intending to do. Probably to gain their cooperation. If you think that somebody's just going to take stuff, then you're probably going to go with it. If you think that somebody's life's going to be in danger, you're probably going to scream and make a lot more noise. So the survival instinct, I think, kicks in with people. They want to believe that they're going to be okay. They want to believe that things are going to work out. So his giving them an opportunity to stay calm thinking that he was only going to steal property. I think that's what his mindset was. But the most valuable thing there was Polly.
The girls describe how the man covers their heads with pillowcases before tying them up.
He was very businesslike, used strips of cloth to tie them up. He had told the girls to count to 1,000.
Everything's gonna be okay here.
After the screen door shut, they gave it a few moments. When they got themselves free, Polly was gone.
Polly's gone.
She disappeared into the night.
Before this all happened, you didn't hear anybody tampering with windows or doors, no footsteps even.
No.
My first thought was, how could this have happened? My second thought was, did this really happen?
Could the story be an adolescent prank taken much too far? It's a question Bello must ask.
Why would we lie? It happened, and so your best friend is missing.
But as he listens to the girls' every word, he sees the fear in their eyes. And that's all he needs.
If you looked in the faces of these little girls, you could see that it had happened and that she really was gone. It didn't take long to figure out that we had something really bad on our hands. I made the decision to call and ask for the FBI to help out.
I'm gonna figure this out.
What had just been a slumber party is now a crime scene. The Petaluma PD broadcasts an all-points bulletin on police radio. This isn't just another case. Finding Polly is a mission. FBI Special Agent Eddie Fryer arrives to head up what will be the biggest investigation of his career.
Polly class reminds me of my own children. Good interests, good friends, and did well in school. Dale came up to me, gave me a good briefing. I asked, well, tell me a little bit about the family. Well, they're divorced. Well, that raises certain flags.
Investigators know that most child abduction cases involve a disgruntled family member. A witness statement from a neighbor reinforces their suspicions.
He tells us that around 10:30 or so, he saw a figure, a man, walking down the driveway. I said, well, didn't that strike some caution in your mind that that was unusual? He said, no, the activity was so normal that he didn't act suspicious. He just went into the house as if he was very familiar with it. We think, well, wait a minute, what kind of kidnapping is this? Is this somebody that knows Polly, somebody that's been in the house before?
Could someone close to Polly possibly have done this? If there's any hope of finding Polly alive, investigators know they need to find out fast. The Sonoma Valley in Northern California, a patchwork of fertile vineyards, rolling orchards, and family-run farms. Nestled within the valley is the growing, but in 1993 still slumbering town of Petaluma.
It was a nice town, nice residential neighborhoods, primarily middle-class folks, you know, just doing their jobs and raising their families.
People knew each other. People took care of each other. A lot of people, they didn't lock their doors at night. You had a lot of innocence.
That innocence is shattered by the brazen abduction of 12-year-old Polly Clàss, snatched from her own bedroom. Though she's just started junior high, Polly's made quite a name for herself as a popular and bright young girl with a flair for the theatrical.
I remember meeting Polly in 6th grade. We do schoolwork together, we had class parties. When we met, Polly and I just were goofy together.
Your ice cream is ready! Hey, your favorite flavor.
And I think you can do that around close friends.
Woo! Go Polly! Thank you for that.
Just be yourself and you don't need to be up on stage.
Polly was such a good girl. She was seriously enjoying where she was and who she was, and really realizing for the first time the potential that she had as an individual.
For all intents and purposes, Polly is your typical preteen.
How was school today, honey? It was good.
Even though her parents, Eve and Mark, divorced when she was only 2.
It was a miserable marriage.
But we got something great out of it. We got this, great little girl out of it.
Living mainly with Eve in Petaluma, Polly stays in close contact with her dad, who lives in Sausalito, just 30 miles away.
Hey, Eve, I'm calling this with Polly. Is she around?
Polly, it's your dad. Hello, Daddy.
Tonight, Polly's at her mom's, and two of her best friends are coming by for a sleepover.
Oh, how nice is that? Who's coming over?
Kate and Jillian, and Annette was invited, but she couldn't come.
She was very excited about that. We talked about it on the phone, as we did almost every night, whether we had anything to talk about or not.
It's gonna be really fun.
The last thing I said to Polly was, "Polly, I love you." And the last thing she said to me was,
Daddy, I love you too. Bye.
Four hours later, Mark and Eve's world lies in tatters.
The initial report was that a strange man had showed up at Polly's house with a knife. It's really hard to grasp. Like, really, why would this happen in Petaluma?
And who took Polly Klaas? The initial search of Polly's house turns up frustratingly little.
There were cut up pieces of material that had been used to bind the girls, as well as Nintendo cords that had been cut and used to tie the girls up. There wasn't a lot of disarray in the house. It looked like what it was, a bunch of girls having a sleepover that had turned into a nightmare.
Technicians pull out all the stops to find even the smallest shred of a potential clue.
After many hours of tedious work, the FBI evidence recovery team found a palm print on Polly's bed.
The palm print is different from all the other prints they find, as it doesn't match any of Polly's family or friends. Could it belong to the mysterious man who took Polly? There's no database for palm prints, so this discovery is meaningless until they find a suspect to match it to. There's no stopping cops on the trail of a child abductor. Within hours, more and more FBI agents join the investigation. And it doesn't take long to transform this sleepy Petaluma police station into an active command center.
We brought in phone lines and the police department like we'd never seen, and we turned our briefing room into a command post.
I knew this was going to be a very big deal.
And the main thing working against them is a ticking clock.
This is 12-year-old Polly Klaas.
I can't think of a time in my life, before or since, that I've felt the kind of pressure and the kind of anxiety and the need to do something as much as I felt.
With hours racing by, investigators turn to Polly's divorced parents for answers.
We have not finished looking at anybody connected to this family.
The conventional wisdom for child abduction cases was that the family would be involved somehow. And so the first thing you wanted to do was eliminate them as suspects.
As painful as it is, investigators need both of her parents to take a polygraph test. Eve goes first.
Eve took the polygraph.
Yesterday, Tuesday.
Sailed right through it.
Thank you so much for coming in and cooperating with us. I know it's hard.
While no one wants to believe it, some in town are suspicious of Polly's father.
Mark came in that same evening.
I was called to the Petaluma police station. I went there and they asked me to wait outside. I thought they're afraid to tell me that Polly's dead. Oh my God, Polly is dead. By the time Eddie Fryer came to get me, I was literally curled up in the fetal position in the parking lot.
Mark.
Eddie goes, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I can't get up day after day not knowing where she is. I'm going to give up." He said, "What do you mean you're going to give up?"
All these people you see behind you, officers pulling double shifts, volunteers from the community who are missing their own families, 24/7.
And he said, "She needs you now more than she's ever needed you before in her life."
Pryor determines Mark is in no shape to take the test today. But he still has to be polygraphed.
We asked him to go home and get some rest. He came back the next evening and got through the polygraph just fine.
There's no way that there's any man in her family that could have done that. Polly loved her dad to pieces and visited him all the time, and she was a daddy's girl.
Town gossip proves to be just that. Police return to their two young witnesses. Kate and Jillian are brought in to see if they can remember any other details from that horrifying night.
You mentioned he had a bandana.
The bandana was yellow.
Okay.
The police artist was called, sat down with the two girls.
His nose, how about that? Big nose, small nose?
It wasn't noticeably large.
Okay.
And put together our initial composite of the guy that came into the bedroom.
Is that our guy?
Yeah, that looks like him.
Weird looking, long hair, bearded guy, wearing a bandana. That was the first picture of the guy who we were looking for.
We have a composite sketch here, if you all want to gather around.
If a stranger abducted Polly, the statistics are grim. Typically, 3/4 of such cases end in murder. Investigators know after 3 days, the chances of finding Polly alive are slim.
We have to get this picture out. We have to get it out there in the community.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Fear of the brazen child abductor spreads through the small town.
It's hard to put a 2-year-old little girl to bed every night now and know that she's not safe. I really feel for her parents.
The community support was unlike anything I've ever seen. Growing up there, you know, I knew a lot of people in Petaluma, and it was really difficult to try to go anywhere. You couldn't go anywhere in town without having somebody come up to you and ask you what was going on with the case, or to offer their opinion on what we should be doing, or to tell you what they'd seen or what they thought might have happened, or to give you their theory. My favorite breakfast place was called Marvin's. We would try to have a quiet breakfast with part of the investigative team, and you'd be sitting there, and people would, you weren't in uniform. We were, we were all in plain clothes, but they knew, and they'd walk over and start talking to you. You couldn't get through a meal in town without having people come up to you, trying to be supportive, but really, it got to the point where information overload took over at some point. It's awkward and it's difficult because you're trying to appease the people that you're sworn to protect.
As the community rallies and spreads out to search for Polly, the media swoops in.
It was People magazine, it was Oprah, it was top to bottom 10 o'clock news.
It doesn't take long for the terrifying story of the missing 7th grader to grip the entire nation.
I just feel like this horrible crime happened to take place in a town that would not stand for it. And so this town is fighting back.
As this case went on, the reaction from the community was so huge, and that generated more news, and the media arrived, and it was the Bay Area media, and it was statewide media, and it was nationwide. The world descended on Petaluma.
The support of the community has been so overwhelming that it gives me the strength and the optimism to keep going.
When news of Polly's abduction reaches Hollywood, Petaluma's most famous hometown girl joins the search.
One day, there was a knock at the Petaluma Police Department door, and it was Winona Ryder.
Recently, in my hometown of Petaluma, California, Polly Claass was kidnapped at knife point.
National news coverage and Winona Ryder's offer of a $200,000 reward helped spread Polly's story from coast to coast.
People were calling every day, 60,000 phone calls and tips. We were investigating everybody under the sun.
We had people 24/7 on the phones to take leads. We had to have go teams ready to go to track down anything that sounded like it could be real.
The most chilling and promising of those calls doesn't come to the call center, but to Polly's dad's house.
The phone call came while I was away. I had a brother-in-law staying at the house to watch the house.
Hello. A young lady said she was Polly.
Polly? Polly, where are you?
She was unable to speak for very long, in a hotel, and would call back.
Polly's home phone is being traced, but the police aren't tracing her father's phone in Sausalito.
There was a mistake on our part, and we might have missed our only opportunity.
It's been a full week since a stranger snatched 12-year-old Polly Clás from her own bedroom in the small Northern California town of Petaluma.
He's a scary man in the middle of the night. He's the boogeyman.
Even with a community, a country, and a world watching, the chance of a positive outcome is looking grim.
It's pretty well known after 2 to 3 days, the odds of getting somebody home are really slim.
But a week after her disappearance, hope returns when Mark Clás's brother-in-law, who's watching his home in Sausalito, answers the phone.
Hello?
It's Polly.
Polly?
I'm in a hotel room.
And then the line goes dead.
We immediately put up a trap trace on his phone.
For 2 days, silence. Then a second call. Is Polly still alive?
Hello?
Same voice, you know, I'm Polly.
I'm in a hotel room. I can't talk long. He's gonna come back soon.
Stay on the line, honey. Polly, stay on the line.
He's coming back. I'm sorry. You gotta go. Bye.
It was just enough to get a trace. We got an address over in Hayward. We put together a team of agents. 5 FBI agents come crashing into their front door with guns drawn.
This is an average middle-class home, not some sketchy hotel.
They soon realized that, wait a minute, this doesn't really look right. And there's this young gal there, and she admits making the 2 phone calls. She was dared by her friends to make the call.
It's Polly.
Unbelievable. Now, it certainly angers people that somebody would do that, but the media coverage was so intense on a case like this. It attracts the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, there was a decision that we had to make. Are we going to arrest this little girl for obstruction of justice, making a false phone call, you know, that sort of thing? We made a decision pretty quickly not to arrest her, but to sit down with her and her family and tell her the nature of the impact that she's having on our ability to find this little girl. And I can tell you that at the end of the day, she got the message. She got the message very loud and clear. The phone call that came in from this gal representing herself as Polly Clás, as well as other spikes. There are spikes in these investigations where you'll get a really hot lead, and it ramps you up to basically a very intense posture, if you will, and you got all your resources working and focusing on that one potential lead, and then all of a sudden you realize, okay, that's not going to resolve this case, or not a really good lead, or you resolve the lead, and then you go back into kind of not a routine, because no day was a routine, but you go back into kind of the flow of the things, the rhythm of the investigation.
We used to, gallows humor kicks in, and we used to joke that it was Groundhog Day. It just, like the movie at the time, it was, just same day, it was everything again. We were right back, you wake up, you drink a cup of coffee, you start going back to the lead sheets and trying to figure out what you might have missed.
2 weeks into the case, and very little progress is being made. For those working the case, there's no hiding the fact the pressure is wearing on them.
We weren't living at home. We were living in a police department. We were living in our offices. We were catching catnaps as we could.
They had the eyes of the world watching how this case was unfolding. So the pressure on how this was going to go must have been absolutely tremendous.
One day, I sat there and I thought to myself, wow, is this what a nervous breakdown feels like?
For best friend Annette, every day without Polly brings more heartache, though she's not ready to give up hope.
I just looked out the window and watched cars drive by. Like, just expecting at 12 years old, like, okay, I'm gonna spot her and she's gonna come back, so.
Despite Annette's and the nation's hopes, Polly has not come back. Then, 3 weeks into the investigation, authorities get another promising call.
Can you hold just a second?
This time, someone's demanding money. Polly could still be alive.
Could you Repeat that again, please.
This guy's saying he has Polly and he wants ransom. Of course, we had the phones at the PD trapped, and we knew exactly where the call came from.
Within an hour of the call, a SWAT team descends on a local apartment building.
SWAT teams made a very forceful entry into that apartment. Guns drawn.
Put your hands behind your back. Relax.
And it turns out it's just a guy trying to extort money from us. These are things you have to deal with.
It was hard. It was difficult.
Putting their frustrations aside, investigators get back to work. A few days later, they get their first solid suspect.
Vallejo Police Department called us. They had arrested a guy breaking into a home of a single mom and a 12-year-old daughter, and he carried with him what was identified as a rape kit, a bag that had binding material in it, some tape, and a rope. They said, hey, he kind of looks like your guy. Same physical description, had a beard, and he has a criminal history. We obtained search warrants and seizure warrants. We seized his car. We took his DNA and his hair and his fingerprints. He was our strongest lead. But we had no information that he had any connection to Petaluma.
Try as they might, investigators can't find anything that ties this suspect to the Polly Claass case. Polly's abductor is still out there.
Again, it was flatline. There was nothing going on.
Mr. Claass, we've got guys out there 24/7. We're doing all we can. You have a daughter! You have a daughter!
I was so angry at the police for not being able to solve this case.
Someone give me some answers?
And every day that they didn't bring her home, in my mind, was a day that they weren't doing their job.
Find that little girl!
Mark was a man who was doing what he could do. For him, it meant going to the volunteer center every day, keeping her name, her picture out there.
We had one goal and one goal only, and that goal was to find Polly and to bring her home.
Unexpectedly, a tip comes in from an FBI informant. This one points the finger squarely at Mark Claass.
We had information that there was a cabin up in Mendocino County in a very remote area. This guy might be involved in it because of some dealings with Mark. There was a possibility. It could have been a kidnapping for revenge or some dope debt.
It's a very, very wooded area, an area known for a lot of marijuana growing.
Even though he passed the lie detector test, Polly's father, the man who has put relentless pressure on police to find his daughter, is now back in the crosshairs of their investigation.
Of course, I mean, it made us look at Mark.
"5 weeks after Polly Claass's abduction, Special Agent Eddie Fryer gets an FBI informant's tip. He says she's being held in a Northern California cabin by drug dealers for a deal with her dad that reportedly went wrong.
I actually turned that over to our SWAT people, and they did a whole big night operation.
Petaluma PD Sergeant Vale Bello leads the team.
We went into where the supposed cabin was to try to gather whatever intelligence we could. We weren't in the woods for more than 20 minutes when the informant told his handler that he had made the whole situation up.
These kinds of rumors were flying around all over the place. They didn't really have anything to do with what we wanted, which was to find Polly.
Suspicions about Mark again turn out to be just that. This roller coaster of a case roars back to the bottom.
So we went back to the grind of the case, and it became a grind. But we still had hopes that we'd find her alive.
Hope is getting harder and harder to hold on to. If it's a true kidnapping, why no real ransom demands? If she's alive, who's holding her? If she's dead, where's her body? 2 months into the case, there are few answers.
The world knew who Polly Claass was. She became this face of everybody's kid. If this girl could be kidnapped from her bedroom in this little neighborhood in this nice town. It could happen anywhere.
I think Polly touched people because here's this girl having friends over, and it's what every kid does. You play board games, and you expect to wake up in the morning and do it all over again. And so I think it could have been anyone's kid.
And everyone wants to know what happened to Polly that night. Just as investigators are trying to figure out where to look next, they get another call. While hiking on her property, Dana Jaffe comes across a strange collection of articles.
I picked up the phone.
Fryer.
It was a deputy in Sonoma County. And he started telling me about this scene that he had uncovered out of Pythian Road.
Thanks.
Fryer knows exactly who to send to investigate this tip.
Larry Pelton was a detective that was in the bedroom the night of the kidnapping. He helped collect the evidence. And so when Detective Pelton goes out and meets Deputy McManus, he had taken a few things off the hillside. One of them was a white silky cloth that was tied up in kind of a semi-ligature device. When he saw that device, he realized that looks exactly like the material we collected 2 months ago in Polly's bedroom.
Turns out Dana Jaffe has quite a story to tell. There's more than a suspicious piece of cloth tying her property to Polly's abduction.
I just came home from work and paid the babysitter.
And the babysitter gets in her car and starts heading down the hill to go home. On her way down the hill, she encounters what she really describes as a scary guy. He's on a private road, and she's petrified. She shoots down to the bottom of the hill and gets to a gas station.
Got a call from her.
She calls Dana, says, hey, there's a scary guy just down the street from your house, inside your gate, and you better get out of there. And that's what she does.
I grabbed the kids and I threw them in the car.
Dana tells them she called police the night of Polly's disappearance to report the strange man on her property just 25 miles from Polly's house.
What seems to be the problem here, sir?
2 deputies from the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office respond to Dana's call. Fryer's team tracks down the incident report taken nearly 2 months earlier.
Their bells and whistles were going off. They didn't know what was wrong, but they knew something was wrong.
Why is this strange man in a rusty hatchback hanging around on this private road?
These 2 deputies, good deputies, they start asking him some questions.
What brings you here?
He says, got lost and I was out sightseeing, and gave him a story that doesn't quite fit.
I didn't press charges. I just wanted him off my property.
The deputies take the man's name and let him go with a warning.
They say, listen, we're going to escort you down to the bottom of the hill and don't ever come back here.
Yeah, run this,
Detectives now run the name on the incident report. Richard Allen Davis. His photograph is a chilling sight. The man seen in the area that night fits the description of the man in Polly's bedroom.
The first time I saw a picture of Richard Allen Davis, it basically knotted my stomach.
Did he file that report?
This is our guy. That's our guy.
And as soon as everybody in the room saw that picture, there was a collective gasp. That's the guy we're looking for.
Davis had been in trouble with the law back to about the age of 12. He'd been in custody more than he wasn't in custody. He'd had 2 convictions for kidnapping women.
Davis certainly looks like their man. And after further investigation, they learn he's living with his sister, roughly 75 miles north of Petaluma. Fryer and Bello race to the sister's house. Is this where Polly's being held? Could she still be alive?
As soon as we drove by the sister's house, I saw in the back of the property a white, beat-up Ford. I went, that's our car. So let's go ahead and make an arrest.
Miss Davis?
Richard Davis isn't there, and there's no sign of Polly. They set up roadblocks.
After we made our initial attempt to arrest him, one of the perimeter officers came on the radio and said, listen, hey, I've got Richard Allen Davis here at my perimeter checkpoint. They made a very low-key arrest, basically said he was under arrest for a parole violation.
Davis says he doesn't know anything about Polly Claass. Detectives take his prints and send them to the lab.
The phone rings. I get on the phone with a fingerprint examiner.
Fryer. Yes.
And he goes, Eddie, I've got some news for you.
You're certain?
I cleared my head and my thoughts for a moment. There was a lot of noise and phones were ringing. People were talking in the command post.
Can I have everyone's attention for a sec? They matched the palm print to Davis.
Papers started flying and people were jumping up and down. Dennis Wicki, one of the key figures in our team, he came over, gave me a big bear hug. It was a big break for everybody. You know, tremendous relief off everybody's shoulders, you know. We still needed one thing, though. We needed Polly.
For 2 months, the nation has been anxious for word of an arrest in 12-year-old Polly Klaas's abduction case. The news finally comes after a palm print taken from Richard Davis comes back as a match to the lone unidentified print found in Polly's bedroom. But even with their man in custody, questions remain. Where is Polly? Is she still alive? If so, her life depends on getting Davis to talk.
Very early in the interview, basically indicated that we knew he committed the Polly Klaas kidnapping case, and that's when he terminated the interview.
You claim you've never actually been in Polly Klaas's home, and yet we can actually place you not only in her home, but in her bedroom.
No, you can't.
Basically said, you guys don't know what you're talking about.
You're bluffing. You got nothing.
That look like we're bluffing?
When they tell Davis about the palm print and raise the specter of the death penalty, he changes his tune.
He now realizes that we have evidence. Davis almost immediately starts confessing to the crime.
Davis admits to what no one has wanted to hear. He killed Polly Klaas. The outgoing 7th grader is not coming home.
After about a 4, maybe even a 5-hour confession, he has agreed to take us to the body.
I'll show you where.
Somewhere just south of Cloverdale.
Cloverdale is nearly an hour away, and although it's near nightfall, Fryer and Bello don't wait. They drive Davis to the site. Polly needs to be found. This needs to end. Now.
I asked Mr. Davis, where is she? And he points out towards a tree that's kind of leaning off to the side, said she's just to the right of that. So I walked out there very carefully.
Bello stands guard over Davis, while Fryer braces himself for what he might find.
I had this vision that I would see something that I would identify almost immediately as Polly Klaas. I lifted up the board, and there was a body. And that's all I could tell. And I remember standing there basically saying, okay, what am I going to do? It might take a couple of days to do DNA or, process the crime scene.
We were convinced there wasn't any other reason to believe it wasn't Polly.
As an agent, Fryer knows the rules. Wait for a positive ID before notifying the family. As a father, he knows what a parent needs to hear.
Yeah, it's Fryer.
I remember calling in and saying, tell everybody we found Polly Klaas.
Sergeant Bello also considers abandoning police procedure.
It's hard to stand there next to a guy who was smoking a cigarette like he just got through watching a basketball game. It was hard to not want to just take care of the whole situation right there and just finish it for the family.
Even now, visiting the Cloverdale site where they found Polly evokes strong memories and emotions.
20 years later, and it's still the same. It's nobody's been here. It's quite the same.
Yeah.
It really is.
It really is, yeah.
People will come out and leave mementos, a prayer, a teddy bear, flower, whatever it is.
Just as these devoted investigators did that night, so many years ago.
I took one of the marked units and ran into town, and I grabbed whatever flowers they had, and we brought it back out here.
And just before our crime scene personnel left, we laid those out. It was hollow ground.
The police told me that they would tell me first, and I took a lot of solace in that.
But being the first to hear of Polly's death does nothing to diminish Mark's anguish.
Somebody lit a fire, and Violet and I just laid there at the fire, and my grief exploded. And I just wailed.
A few minutes later, Polly's mom, Eve, gets the same terrible news.
Eve Nickel had kept a candle burning in the window every night, waiting for her return. And she went home that night and snuffed out the candle.
Word of Polly's murder quickly travels beyond the family to best friends like Annette.
We were at my birthday party because it was my birthday. So we were at a pizza place in Petaluma, and my friend's aunt came and said, "You need to go to Jillian's house, like right away." We pulled up to the house, and I could just hear people like screaming. Like everyone's with like their own mom, and my mom was there, and she just looked at me and she just said, "I'm sorry." So
Richard Allen Davis confesses to the murder of Polly Claass. Evidence suggests he also attempted a lewd act. Davis denies it. Nevertheless, prosecutor Greg Jacobs reconstructs the horrors of the night of October 1st, 1993. Jacobs is determined to prove this was no sudden, random act. Davis was stalking his prey.
He was in the neighborhood for weeks beforehand. He just simply targeted her. There's no question in my mind he knew what the layout of the house was. I think he just wanted to do what he wanted to do. So he carried out his plan.
She never got out of the bedroom. He forced her right back in, and he went right to work tying all three of them up.
He picked her up and carried her out of the room, and they disappeared into the night.
Davis drives to the property on Pythian Road, where he kills Polly. As he's leaving, his car gets stuck, and Dana Jaffe's babysitter spots him.
Two sheriff's deputies come check it out.
They didn't have an awareness of the case that night that was going on over in our agency.
In 1993, there are no Amber Alerts, and police in different counties often operate on different radio frequencies. The deputies don't hear about a missing child.
The deputies that went to that scene that night, those gentlemen are friends of mine still to this day. And I know that case, it haunts them still.
It was probably too late for them to save Polly's life anyway.
The evidence suggests that an assault did occur at Pythian Road. She was killed up there. And then when he came back, it was coming to get her body.
On June 18th, 1996, Richard Allen Davis is convicted of murder, kidnapping, and attempting a lewd act. When the verdict is announced, Davis shows the jury a final act of contempt. He's sentenced to death.
They say you need to forgive in this life? Nah, you don't have to forgive. I can hold a piece of hatred in my heart for this guy until I draw my last dying breath.
The ordeal has a profound effect on everyone who knew Polly.
I got up and walked over to the bay, very close to where we were, and I had never felt so alone in my life. And I started tossing rocks. When you skip rocks, it creates circles that open up, and those circles ultimately intermingle with each other. And it got me to thinking that I'm not really alone.
Polly's spirit lives on at Petaluma Junior High School, where her friends paint a giant mural in her honor.
They wanted to just do something creative in her memory and honor her. Looking back, she was like innocence personified, and had an awful thing happen to her.
For Mark Claass, Polly's murder is a call to action. He now devotes his life to the Claass Kids Foundation, which aims to stop crimes against children and help parents with missing children of their own.
So here we are, 20 years later. Polly's still helping.